The microphones were already live when the girl stood up in the middle of the hospital lobby. Cameras swung toward her. The senator stopped mid-sentence. Security took one cautious step forward. She didn't say a word. Her hands did. Fast, sharp, angry. On every screen in the state, people saw a thin 16-year-old girl in a faded hoodie signing with the kind of fury you only earn from being ignored too long. The interpreter on stage froze. He didn't know how to keep up. The senator's smile tightened. Someone hissed, "Cut her off," into a headset. And that's when the janitor with the gray cart and tired eyes walked straight into the spotlight. Ryan Morales set his mop aside, moved to the girl's side, and turned to the cameras. "I'll say it," he told the room, his voice steady. "I'll tell you what she's trying to tell you. Every word. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world." Thing is, nobody woke up that morning expecting the night shift janitor at St. Gabriel Medical Center to be the one person willing to risk everything. At 37, Ryan's life didn't look like much from the outside. He pushed a squeaky, rattling cart down fluorescent-lit hallways in Dallas, Texas, emptying trash cans, mopping up coffee spills, and scrubbing away whatever the day shift didn't want to touch. His uniform was always clean, even when his eyes weren't. You only got 4 or 5 good hours of sleep when you were a single dad on nights. Most mornings, when the city was just turning from purple to gray, he'd pull into the apartment complex, kill the engine, and sit for a second in the quiet. Then he'd grab the Spider-Man backpack from the passenger seat and head upstairs. His 8-year-old son, Noah, would already be awake, hair sticking up in all directions, cartoons humming softly in the background. "Morning, Dad," he'd say, climbing into Ryan's lap like he was still 5. They'd eat cereal together. Ryan would double-check homework, sign the reading log, and walk Noah to school, pretending the ache in his chest was just from lack of sleep, and not from the fact that his wife Maria should have been there between them. She'd been gone 2 years now. A blood clot. Sudden. Unfair. One minute, she was laughing at some dumb joke he made in the kitchen. The next, he was standing in an ER waiting room, staring at a vending machine because it was easier than looking at the doctor's face. Grief had a way of rearranging your priorities. Ryan didn't care about titles anymore. He cared about being there when Noah needed him, about paying the rent on time, and about keeping the promise he'd made at 2 bedsides, his wife's and his big brother's. His brother Luis had been born deaf. Growing up while the rest of the family stumbled through gestures and lip reading, Ryan was the one who sat with Luis by the kitchen table, learning the alphabet on his fingers, turning words into shapes in the air. ASL was his second language, but it was the first one that ever taught him how much it mattered to really see someone. That's why, on an ordinary Tuesday night in March, when he was sweeping the quiet pediatric wing, he noticed her. A teenage girl sitting alone on a plastic chair outside the social worker's office, knees pulled up, hoodie sleeves chewed at the cuffs. Her hearing aids were off, tucked into her palm, like she was tired of them. Nurses walked past her with quick, apologetic smiles that never quite reached their eyes. The social worker's muffled voice leaked through the half-open door, talking to someone on the phone about placement and budget limits. The girl's hands moved in a tight, frustrated storm. Not random fidgeting, signing. Fast, sharp, full of words nobody in that hallway understood. Nobody except the man with the mop bucket. Ryan stopped. He let the broom rest against the wall, wiped his palms on his uniform, and stepped closer, careful not to startle her. When she finally looked up, eyes flat with the kind of tired that doesn't belong on a 16-year-old's face, he lifted his hands. Slow. Clear. "Hello," It was a simple sign he'd made 1,000 times in his life. He had no idea that this time in this hallway, it would be the one small movement that would pull him into a fight far bigger than his job description. A fight that would end with cameras, senators, and a girl who refused to be invisible 1 second longer. Ryan didn't expect the hallway to change anything, just a quiet moment between two people who understood the same language in a world that rarely bothered to learn it. But the next night, the tension in the hospital felt different before he even clocked in. A thickness hung in the air, like the weather was about to break. Only it wasn't the sky that was ready to storm. As he pushed his cart through the sliding doors, Denise from admissions flagged him down with a look that told him trouble had been brewing since morning. "You stirred something up last night," she whispered. "Just be careful tonight, okay?" He blinked. "What did I do?" She opened her mouth as if to explain, then closed it just as fast. "You'll see." And she hurried off, leaving him with nothing but a knot forming under his ribs. He started his shift in the pediatric ward, the usual swirl of beeping monitors and soft conversations drifting behind curtains. But by the time he reached the elevator for the second floor, he found out what Denise meant. A cluster of hospital administrators stood near the nurses' station, Blazer's sharp expressions sharper. The man in front, a tall, lean figure with silver hair, turned the second Ryan approached. "Huh?" the man said, as if he'd been waiting. "You're the janitor who inserted himself into a patient interaction last night." Ryan stopped mid-step. "I didn't insert myself into anything. She was alone. She was signing." I answered. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. And that is precisely the issue. He introduced himself as William Granger, Director of Patient Relations, a title that sounded helpful, but felt more like a warning. "We have protocols," Mr. Morales Granger said. "Clear boundaries about who interacts with minors, especially those involved in ongoing state cases. Your engagement created confusion for staff." What he meant, Ryan realized, was inconvenience. "I just communicated with her," Ryan said quietly. "That's all." "And that is exactly what we don't need," Granger replied. "These situations are delicate enough. We cannot have a janitor," he said the word like it tasted sour, "appearing to represent the hospital or influence a minor in the middle of a custody review." Custody review. That phrase hit harder than the disrespect. So the girl wasn't just waiting for a social worker, she was waiting for the state to decide her future. And the hospital, like every institution trying to avoid liability, was desperate to stay clean, even if it meant treating her like a file number instead of a human being. Ryan kept his voice steady. She needed someone who could understand her. "That is not your role," Granger snapped. The nurses behind him exchanged glances, guilt creeping through their expressions. Not one of them had intervened. They knew that. From now on, Granger continued, "You will maintain appropriate distance from all patients, unless cleaning staff is specifically requested. Violations will result in formal disciplinary review." He waited, as if expecting Ryan to crumble. Instead, Ryan nodded once. "Understood," good, Granger said, though he clearly wanted something more: submission, maybe. Fear. Something that would reaffirm his place above the man with the mop. Ryan turned his cart and headed down the hall. His shoulders didn't slump, but something in his chest pressed tight, quiet, and heavy. He'd seen this before: people hiding behind rules, not to protect patients, but to protect themselves. He'd watched his brother endure it his entire life. Policies meant to help him were the same ones that fenced him out. But what hit hardest wasn't the disrespect. It was what it might cost the girl. Would she think he disappeared because he didn't care, or worse, because she'd done something wrong? That thought scraped at him like sandpaper. By the time he reached the oncology wing, he was moving on autopilot. Empty trash. Wipe counters. restock gloves. His hands worked their familiar rhythm, but his mind replayed every detail of the night before, her face opening with surprise, the sparking hope in her eyes when someone finally responded in her language. A hope he might have accidentally taken from her. He didn't see her again until nearly 10 o'clock. He'd ducked into the north stairwell to catch a breath, a quiet moment away from Granger's watchful patrol, and when the door swung open, she was there. The same girl from last night. Hood pulled low, a backpack slung over one shoulder, as if she'd packed her whole world inside it. She froze at the sight of him, and then her hands moved fast, urgent, frightened. "Are you in trouble because of me?" Ryan shook his head immediately, then signed, "Not because of you, because they don't know how to listen." She exhaled hard through her nose like she'd been holding a breath too long. Then she stepped closer, almost defiantly, and signed again. "They want to put me somewhere else, a place hours away. They think it's best." Her face didn't crack, but her fingers betrayed her stiff tension in the wrists, a tremor she tried to hide. He signed back slowly so she knew he wasn't rushing her. "Why?" She pointed at her ears, then at the floor, then at the ceiling. A whole sentence shaped by frustration. "Because I'm too much trouble." Behind her, footsteps echoed faintly distant, but approaching. She stiffened instantly. Ryan had two options: pretend he wasn't talking to her, or keep signing and let the consequences fall where they may. He chose without hesitation. "I see you," he signed. "You matter. You're not trouble." Her eyes watered, not with weakness, but with a fury that reminded him of Luis at 16, sick of pretending that silence meant stupidity. The stairwell door flew open. A social worker stood in the frame, panting, anxious. "There you are," she cried, grabbing the girl's arm with a gentleness that wasn't gentle at all. Her gaze snapped to Ryan. "She's not supposed to talk to staff." "We've gone over this." "She wasn't talking," Ryan said quietly. "She was communicating." "That's worse," the woman muttered, yanking the girl closer. That single phrase landed like a punch. "That's worse," as if the girl's language was a threat, as if understanding her made things harder instead of better. The girl fought the grip, just a small twist, barely noticeable, unless you knew what panic looked like, but it was enough for the social worker to tighten her hold. "I'll take her downstairs," the woman said sharply. "And you," she added, turning her full frustration on Ryan, "stay away from my cases." The girl's eyes met his as she was pulled away. Not pleading, not asking for rescue, just resigned, a look no 16-year-old should ever have. He signed one last time while she could still see him. "You're not alone." Her steps faltered for a second, one heartbeat before she disappeared down the stairwell. After the door shut, silence swallowed the space. Ryan stood there, knuckles whitening on the mop handle, breathing slow to keep the tornado inside from breaking loose. Back in the hallway, hospital, staff avoided his eyes. Word had spread. He was trouble now. A janitor who didn't stay in his lane. By midnight, 2 supervisors had checked in on him. Someone from HR emailed him. Granger watched him from every corner like a man monitoring a leak he wanted sealed. But none of that compared to what happened at 4 a.m. He had just finished mopping outside radiology when a voice called out behind him. "Mr. Morales." He turned. A police officer stood beside Granger, both looking serious. The officer stepped forward. "We need to ask you some questions," he said, "about your involvement with a minor currently under state review." Ryan didn't move, didn't speak. He only felt one thing: Something was coming. Something big. And whether or not he wanted the fight, it was headed straight for him. The pressure that had been building all night finally reached its breaking point. And for the first time in years, Ryan felt the ground shift beneath his feet, warning him that the next step he took would change everything. The fluorescent lights in radiology hummed the way they always did at 4 in the morning, steady, indifferent, too bright for an hour when most of the world was asleep. But the silence between Ryan Granger and the police officer was nothing like the sterile quiet of the hospital. It was electric, pressurized, seconds from snapping. Mr. Morales, the officer, repeated, one hand resting not aggressively but deliberately near the clasp of his belt. "We've received a report alleging inappropriate involvement with a minor patient." Ryan felt the floor tilt beneath him. Not because he feared the accusation, he knew who he was, what he'd done, what he hadn't done. No. What rattled him was imagining that girl somewhere in the building believing for 1 second that she had caused this. That her reaching out for someone who understood her had created danger instead of safety. He swallowed. "Who made the report?" "That's confidential." Granger cut in. His tone carried a sick satisfaction, like the pieces were finally falling into place the way he wanted. Ryan kept his gaze on the officer. "I'm happy to answer anything, but I want to be clear I didn't do anything except sign to her." She was distressed. "I responded." Granger snorted. "You inserted yourself into a state-supervised case. That's not responding. That's violating boundaries." But the officer hadn't looked away from Ryan. Something in his eyes wasn't convinced. "Not yet? Not completely. We need you to come with us." "Am I being detained?" Ryan asked. "Not if you cooperate," the officer said. "We just need a statement about signing hello to a girl who'd been drowning in silence all night." Granger stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This is why we have rules, Morales. You overstepped, and now the hospital is liable." Ryan felt his jaw clench. He thought of his brother Luis, now gone. The way people had spoken around him about him, over him, but never to him. How often Luis had been treated like a problem rather than a person. He thought of Maria, her hand squeezing his when she made him promise to raise Noah in a world where kindness wasn't treated like a mistake. And he thought of that girl in the stairwell, her hands trembling as she signed, "They think I'm too much trouble." He looked at the officer, then at Granger. "Fine," he said. "I'll come." But before anyone could move, voices rose down the hall, sharp, tense, urgent. A nurse ran toward them. "Is anyone with the social worker?" she gasped, breathless. "The girl, she's gone." The officer stiffened. "Gone. Gone," where she bolted from the waiting room, the nurse said. "Security is searching the first floor. She's in crisis. If she gets outside..." No one needed her to finish the sentence. A deaf teenager alone, frightened, running through a medical complex at 4 in the morning. The dangers were endless: traffic construction zones, confused security guards who didn't realize she couldn't hear commands. The officer turned sharply. "We need eyes everywhere. Now!" Granger stepped back, pale. "This is exactly what I feared. Get every hallway locked down." Ryan didn't speak, didn't ask permission, didn't wait for orders. He simply ran. The officer shouted after him. Granger yelled that he was making things worse. But their voices were already fading behind him as he sprinted through the corridor, his worn work shoes pounding against linoleum. He didn't know where she was, but he knew how she thought. Silence was her world, which meant noise wasn't useful to her. Feelings were. Patterns were. Light and shadow. Vibration. Escape paths. Every deaf kid he'd ever known had a sixth sense for movement and space. And when they bolted towards something, never just away. He raced down the central stairwell 2 steps at a time. His breath tore through him in sharp bursts. He felt every hour of sleep he hadn't gotten in the past 3 years. But adrenaline pushed him harder. First floor, emergency exit alarms screaming, security radios crackling. He burst into the courtyard. Cold air slapped his face. And there, across the dark stretch of pavement, he spotted a small figure climbing the low fence that separated the hospital grounds from the employee parking garage. The garage, concrete ramps, blind turns, cars barreling through without warning. "Hey!" a guard yelled from the other side. "Kid, stop!" But she couldn't hear him. She dropped into the garage, like a shadow disappearing into deeper shadow. Ryan didn't hesitate. He sprinted. He hit the fence, vaulted over his knees, screaming at him, and landed hard, jarring his spine. But he kept moving. Inside the garage, the air was colder, echoing with engines and footsteps, and the low hum of fluorescent bulbs. He looked right, left, up the ramp. Nothing. Then he saw it movement behind a concrete pillar near the second level. He ran toward it, slowly at first, then slowing even more, because he remembered Luis flinching when people approached too fast. Deaf kids didn't react to sound. They reacted to vibration, to motion, to the energy a body carried. He softened his steps, raised his hands, made his movements deliberate, gentle, visible. When he turned the corner, she was there back, pressed against the pillar, breathing hard, eyes wide with panic. Her hands were up, ready to sign, but trembling too much to hold shape. She didn't see him at first. A car turned the corner on the ramp behind her. Headlights swept the concrete. Tires squealed. She froze, caught in the glare. The driver slammed the brakes, but there wasn't enough distance. Ryan didn't think. He moved. He sprinted, cutting across the garage floor, lungs burning. The headlights tethered him to the moment. The engine roared. The girl didn't hear a thing. He reached her just as the car skidded. He grabbed her by the arms, not rough, not desperate, but firm enough to lift her off her feet, and spun them both out of the lane. His shoulder slammed into the pillar. Pain shot down his spine. The car screeched to a halt, inches from where she'd been standing. For a moment, all three of them, Ryan, the girl, the gasping, panicked driver, were locked in a stunned silence. Then the girl looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. "You came." He exhaled shakily. "Of course." Her hands paused, then shaped another sentence slower this time. "I thought you got in trouble because of me." He shook his head. "No. I got in trouble because they don't understand." The driver stumbled out of the car, babbling apologies, waving his phone as if calling someone would undo the near miss. But more footsteps thundered into the garage. Security, nurses, the police officer, and Granger. They skidded to a stop, stunned by the sight, Ryan holding the girl safely against him, his arm braced against the pillar, the car idling behind him with its front bumper just inches from disaster. The officer spoke first, voice low, almost reverent. "You saved her." Granger's expression twisted not gratitude, but disbelief. Then something darker, something like fear. The girl pulled away from Ryan just enough to face the adults swarming toward her. Her hands rose again, sharp, precise, fueled by a courage he hadn't seen in her before. She signed at them, not just one sentence, but several, her gestures fierce, unfiltered. The social worker gasped. She's asking why everyone only talks about her and never to her." A murmur rippled through the group. She signed again, faster. The nurse translated softly. "She says she pointed at Ryan, is the only one who saw her. The only one who listened." Ryan felt something in his chest loosen, something that had been wound tight for years. The officer nodded toward him. "Morales, we need your statement regarding the incident." Granger stepped forward. "This man violated multiple—" The officer cut him off. "Sir, with all due respect, he prevented a tragedy." The social worker's voice wavered. She wouldn't even look at us. She looked for him. Another murmur, another shift in the air. Ryan met the girl's gaze. She wasn't trembling anymore. Her hands lifted. "Thank you." He managed a small, trembling smile. "Always." The officer turned back to the crowd. "We're escorting both of them upstairs so she can be medically cleared. Morales comes with us," Granger sputtered. "You can't involve him further?" "We just did," the officer said flatly. And just like that, the power dynamic in the hospital had shifted. Everyone saw that the janitor was the only one who'd acted. The only one who'd understood the danger. The only one who'd listened. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was the reason the girl was alive. And as they walked back toward the building, security fanning out the girl at his side, the first threads of a new storm gathered behind them. A storm that would expose the truth, topple someone's agenda, and drag Ryan into a fight he never asked for. But tonight, he'd saved her. And everyone knew it. The walk back through the ambulance bay felt strangely quiet, even with radios buzzing, gurney wheels clicking, and security boots striking pavement in sharp, hurried rhythms. Ryan stayed close to the girl, not touching her now, but matching her steps, as if she were a pulse he didn't dare lose again. She kept glancing at him, not clingy, not afraid, just checking, confirming that he was real, that he was still there. Inside the emergency wing, fluorescent lights hit them like a second sunrise. Nurses parted as they came through, conversations falling into hushes. A few whispered, "That's him," under their breath. One nurse gave Ryan a tight nod, gratitude tightening her eyes. Another stepped forward to help the girl onto a gurney, but paused when the teenager stiffened. Ryan signed gently. "They just want to make sure you're okay. No needles, no strangers touching." Her shoulders eased. That tiny shift, her trusting his translation more than anyone else's touch, did something to the room. A dozen people stood there, and she still picked him. A janitor, a man they'd all overlooked until tonight. The officer beside them cleared his throat. "Morales, don't wander off. We still need your statement." Before Ryan could answer, the ER doctor stepped into view. A short, compact woman with salt-streaked hair and dark circles under sharp eyes. She looked like someone who'd seen enough nights like this to know what mattered. "You're the one who grabbed her out of that garage lane," she said. "Not a question, an assessment." Ryan nodded. The doctor exhaled softly. "You saved her life." Had that car hit her? She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Everyone knew how that sentence ended. Granger stepped into the circle, then arms crossed, trying to reclaim authority he'd lost the moment headlights swept across Ryan's back. "This doesn't change the fact," Granger said sharply, "that he was already under investigation for inappropriate involvement." The girl jerked upright on the exam bed. Her hand snapped into movement, furious, fast, clear. Ryan instinctively stepped closer, interpreting aloud only because the staff around them deserved to hear it. "She says he translated. I chose to talk to him. I went to him. Because none of you did." A wave moved through the room. Shame. Recognition. Discomfort. And in a few faces, relief. Relief that someone finally said what they had all ignored. The girl signed again, smaller motions, this time more private. But Ryan gave her space. He didn't voice those words. Not everything was meant to be translated. The doctor softened. "Let's get her checked out. Mr. Morales, stay nearby." Granger sputtered. "That's completely inappropriate. He's not family. He's not certified. He's the only one she trusts right now," the doctor said. "Unless you'd rather she run again." Silence fell like a verdict. Granger backed up, color draining from his face as the authority he clung to cracked clean through. Ryan stood there for a moment, unsure what to do with the eyes watching him, not judgmental anymore, but curious, respectful, even grateful. Respect from a room like this felt foreign, heavy, too large to hold. He stepped back to give the medical team room, but the girl caught his sleeve lightly between two fingers and signed, "Stay." So he stayed. As nurses examined her, the officer took notes from a distance. Granger hovered near the doorway, trying to appear essential and ending up looking lost. The social worker whispered into her phone with an urgency that suggested this night would end with paperwork none of them wanted to file. But under the swirl of movement, the ER doctor kept glancing at Ryan with a strange, probing expression. After a few minutes, she finally asked, "Where did you learn to sign like that?" He hesitated, then answered simply, "My brother." Her brows lifted. "You don't just know ASL. You understand it, the pacing, the emotional cues, the grammar. Most interpreters miss half of what you just caught." Ryan looked at the floor. "I grew up with it." "Did you ever work professionally?" she pressed. "No." The officer glanced up. "Funny. You translate like someone who's been doing it for years." Granger jumped on that, which means he's been misrepresenting himself on his employment documents. Ryan shot him a flat look. "I put down janitor. Because that's what I am." The doctor studied him again, longer, deeper. "Not only that, I think." But before she could say more, the girl suddenly flinched, grabbing her ribs. The nurse checking her vitals frowned. Her breathing's tightening. The doctor stepped in fast. "Get me her chart, now." The room shifted instantly. Clipboards grabbed drawers, opened orders, fired off. The monitors beeped faster. The nurse working the blood pressure cuff winced. Her stress is spiking. The doctor moved to the girl's side. "She needs to calm down or she'll hyperventilate." But the girl wasn't panicking. She was signing wild, frantic bursts of motion that no one understood. Except Ryan. He leaned in, letting her see his hands first, so she wouldn't be startled. Her signs came faster, like falling dominoes. He signed back with both hands, slow, grounding movements, his voice translating without thinking. "She says she can't breathe because she thinks they're taking her away tonight. She thinks this was her last chance to choose anything." A few staff members froze mid-action. She says Ryan continued. She doesn't want to disappear somewhere nobody talks to her. The doctor's jaw tightened. She looked at the social worker, who looked away. The girl reached for Ryan, again, harder this time. Not grabbing, anchoring. The doctor placed a hand on Ryan's forearm. "Talk to her. Whatever you're doing, it's working." He nodded, lowering himself so he was eye level with the girl. He signed slowly, deliberately. "You're safe right now. We're not going anywhere until you can breathe. Just look at me. Right here." Her breaths steadied, shoulders lowered. The frantic motion in her hands softened. The doctor watched the transformation, awe rising like dawn across her face. "How did you do that?" Ryan didn't know how to explain something he'd been doing since he was 12. "You learn how to speak to someone in the language they listen in." The officer leaned back against the wall, his expression shifting into something Ryan hadn't expected: respect. Deep, grounded respect. Granger looked like someone watching his own authority evaporate. The doctor placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "You didn't just calm her. You de-escalated a medical crisis. That's not something janitors get trained for." Ryan didn't answer. Because this wasn't pride, or ego, or some kind of victory. It was simply instinct muscle memory shaped by years of loving someone the world didn't know how to hear. But the doctor wasn't finished. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Your brother. Was he born deaf? Ryan's throat tightened, but he nodded. The doctor's eyes softened. And he passed away recently. Ryan inhaled slowly. 3 years. She looked at him the way someone looks at a photograph they suddenly understand. You weren't just signing with her tonight. You were signing with him. The words hit like a quiet bell, painful, true echoing. Ryan didn't speak. The girl watched him, not understanding the spoken words, but reading the emotion in his posture, his expression. She reached out, brushed the back of his hand with her fingertips, a gesture of recognition. When he met her eyes, she signed something small. You lost someone too. He nodded. Her hands shaped another phrase. You don't talk about it. He blinked hard. No, not usually. The officer stepped forward cautiously. Mr. Morales, there's something you should know. He lifted a tablet where a paused video feed glowed. Security pulled footage from the stairwell. He hit play. It showed Granger grabbing the girl's arm earlier that night, in a way that violated every guideline for interacting with a deaf minor. It showed her trying to sign. It showed him ignoring her. It showed Ryan stepping in gently, correctly, humanely. This, the officer said, was the report that came in. Granger filed it, claiming you interfered. But when we reviewed the footage well, the officer turned to Granger. You misrepresented the incident. You escalated her distress. And you blamed the only person who handled it appropriately. The room went still. Granger's face drained of color. You can't, this isn't... The doctor raised her voice, sharp as a scalpel. William, you put her in danger tonight. And you tried to punish the man who kept her alive. Even the nurses straightened. The girl looked at Granger, her hands moving once more. Ryan translated softly. She says she's not invisible. That landed harder than any accusation. For the first time all night, Granger couldn't speak. The officer turned back to Ryan. Mr. Morales, the hospital administration is meeting in 2 hours. They want you present, not as a defendant, as a witness, and frankly, he exhaled as an expert. Expert, Ryan repeated. You communicated with her better than anyone here, the officer said. We need your testimony to protect her. The doctor added quietly, and the hospital needs your insight to fix what's broken. Ryan felt the world tilt again, but not like before. Not a fall, a shift, a widening. The girl signed something else, her hands slow, steady. We need you to stay. He swallowed. Not janitor, not rule breaker, not background noise. Someone who could change what happened next. The officer stepped aside, giving Ryan a clear view of the girl. Small, fierce breathing steadily now because of him. Mr. Morales, the doctor said, will you come to the meeting? A choice stretched out before him, one he hadn't seen coming. But he knew the answer. Not because of pride, not because of recognition, but because of the promise he made long before tonight. Don't let kindness become silence. He looked at the girl and signed, I'll be there. And for the first time all night, she smiled like she believed tomorrow might be different. The conference room they ushered Ryan into was nothing like the basement closets he spent most nights cleaning. Morning light streamed through tall windows, turning the polished table into a stage. Every department head was already seated: risk management, pediatrics, legal administration. Even the hospital president had shown up, still in his golf jacket. The girl sat beside her social worker, calmer now, but alert. She searched the room until she found Ryan, and only then did her shoulders soften. Conversations died the moment he stepped inside. People who wouldn't have glanced twice at him yesterday now straightened, stepped aside, made space. The shift was undeniable. The president cleared his throat. "Mr. Morales, first thank you. You prevented a tragedy last night." He glanced toward the security footage paused on the screen, Ryan lifting the girl out of the car's path. "If not for you, this hospital would be discussing a death, not a meeting." Granger sat at the far end, small and gray, avoiding every eye. His name tag, usually worn proudly, was half turned around, as if even the clip wanted distance. Legal began detailing violations not Ryan's, but Granger's. Failure to follow deaf interaction protocol, escalation of distress, filing a knowingly misleading report, risk management recommended suspension pending review. Granger didn't argue. He looked like a man finally seeing the damage he'd caused laid out in front of him. The social worker rose, next hands clasped. "This young lady," she said, "has asked that Mr. Morales be present at every decision regarding her placement." She expressed this very clearly. The girl nodded and signed something firm. Ryan interpreted without being asked. "She says she won't go anywhere unless they talk to her, not around her." A few board members blinked, ashamed. The president let out a long breath. "She's right," he said quietly. "We've been operating as if her silence meant ignorance. That ends today." Then he turned to Ryan. "We'd like to create a new position here. A role for someone who understands communication barriers, emotional cues, and crisis de-escalation. Someone who can train our staff and help bridge gaps we've ignored for too long." Ryan blinked. "Me?" The president smiled. "You've already been doing the job. We're just offering to put your name on the door." A few months earlier, Ryan might have laughed at the idea, him a janitor, with permanent circles under his eyes, and a mop bucket older than his son stepping into a leadership role. But last night replayed in his mind the girl's trembling hands, the headlights, the breath he felt leave her body before she caught it again in his arms. He thought of Luis, of all the times his brother had needed someone in the room who understood his language before words were even spoken. Ryan nodded once. "If I do it, it has to be real. Real resources, real training, real commitment to accessibility. Not a PR patch." The president didn't hesitate. Real. The girl's face broke into a small, relieved smile. She signed something gentle. "You're good at this." He signed back, "Thank you." By early afternoon, Granger had been escorted out of the building. Staff whispered not with gossip, but with reflection. It was the kind of day that rearranged people's priorities. The social worker approached Ryan with a folded piece of paper. "She drew this for you," she said, "before she even knew if you'd accept the job." Inside was a sketch, rough but clear, of two people signing across a gap. But the gap wasn't empty. It was filled with little shapes that looked like stepping stones. And written above it in shaky handwriting were 4 words: "You made a bridge." Ryan stood there for a long moment, swallowing hard. He had no idea a scrap of paper could feel like a lifetime of meaning. Weeks later, the changes became visible. Staff began learning basic ASL phrases, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Posters about communication etiquette hung beside fire escape maps. The girl was placed with a foster family fluent in sign, her request honored without debate. She visited the hospital often, partly for follow-ups, partly to check on her project, as she called it. And Ryan, now director of patient communication support, still walked the halls at night sometimes. Not with a mop, but with purpose. Nurses asked him for insight. Doctors wanted his perspective, Administrators sought his approval before drafting policies. It was surreal, but it wasn't ego. It was using everything he'd learned the hard way to make someone else's path easier. Noah noticed the difference too. He'd climb into Ryan's lap in the morning, cereal bowl in hand, and say, "Dad, you look less tired now." One Saturday, almost 6 months after the night in the parking garage, the girl visited Ryan's office. She wore a t-shirt with bold letters, "My voice has hands." She signed something that made him laugh. "Your office is too clean. It looks fake." He signed back, "I'm still learning how to look important." She grinned. Then her expression softened. Her hands moved slower. "You didn't let me disappear." He touched his chest in acknowledgement. "I promised someone I wouldn't let kindness get quiet." She nodded, as if she understood the deeper meaning that kindness doesn't need applause, just courage. As she left the office, she paused in the doorway and signed one last thing. "You see people. That's rare." When she walked away, sunlight from the hallway lit the paper she'd given him months before, still pinned to the wall above his desk. The bridge she'd drawn wasn't perfect. The stones were uneven, but it held, just like the one he'd built without meaning to. And on nights when the building grew quiet and the world felt too loud, Ryan would sit back, close his eyes, and remember something his brother once signed to him, on a day when the world had been unkind. "You don't need to be loud to change something. You just need to be clear." It took him years to understand the truth of that. But now, he lived it. And sometimes the softest hands make the strongest echo.